Hi everyone, my name is Lauren from Crack the DAT. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode number 12 of Pre-Dental Talk. So today I'm going to be joined by my good friend and classmate Min. We are both second year dental students at Harvard, and today we're going to be talking with you about advice that we wish we knew when we were pre-dental students. So we have a lot of different topics that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the dental admission test or DAT and our advice on how to study and approach that test. We're also going to talk about the dental school application process and all of the components that go into that, from activities to writing a personal statement to getting letters of recommendation. And we're going to wrap up by sharing advice that we wish we knew when we were in your shoes a few years ago and we were pre-dental students. So I'm super excited to have Min join me today. She has a lot of wisdom to share and is an amazing person to talk to and get advice from. So let's just jump right into it. All right, so we're here with Min. Min is one of my second year classmates at Harvard and also one of my good friends. So I'm going to start by having Min introduce herself. And just to give you a quick overview of how this is going to go, we're going to talk about a lot of different topics that are related to the pre-dental application process, related to taking the DAT, and a lot of other miscellaneous stuff. And basically, we want to give you advice that we wish we knew when we were pre-dentals. So I'll have Min go ahead and introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Hi, my name is Min. I'm a second year dental student at Harvard. I graduated from Ursinus College with double major in biology and applied ethics. And throughout my undergrad experiences, I decided that I wanted to do dentistry. I wanted to take that as my profession. So here I am.
Thank you, Min. We're so happy that you're here and willing to take the time to share advice that you wish you knew when you were pre-dental a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
So to get started, the first topic that I want to bring up is the DAT. And for a lot of pre-dental students, this is something really daunting and really scary because it is a big test and it is a really important part of the application process. So I'll have you go ahead and start by sharing advice that you wish you knew when you were studying for this test a few years ago.
Mhm. Yeah, so one thing to note is DET is different than any undergrad exams that you're used to. It's a standardized test like SAT or ACT. So it's important for you to know how you did with those standardized exams in the past and really know your study skill strengths and weaknesses. And I would advise for you to know how you would tackle each subject because each subject should be studied differently. For example, for biology, I think constant content review is the best way to go, or that's how it went for me. Versus chemistry, organic chemistry and general chemistry, it's all about practice and seeing a lot of those similar questions over and over again. So it depended on the amount of practice that I got on those problems. Same goes for reading and math. So I would just think about each subject that is in DAT, what's on there, how many questions per section, and really plan your study time out. And that being said, I would go online and search through different resources that are out there for you for PAT practice, for math problem practice, reading practice. For reading, it doesn't really have to be stuff from DAT practice sources. It could be just reading a book and timing yourself and pacing yourself as you're reading certain things.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So the DAT has several different subjects on it, like Min mentioned. So there's science, there's perceptual ability, there's reading, and there's math. And all of those subjects can be studied for really differently. So that's really good advice. For me, I think the best advice that I have for the DAT is to go into it with a plan and a schedule because, like I mentioned, this is a really huge test. And if you're just viewing the test as a whole, it really does feel overwhelming and it feels like maybe this is too much and maybe I can't do it, which is not true at all. So when I was studying, I tried to make my own study schedule and just have a sense of what I was going to do each week. So you don't need to be super detailed about it because your schedule might change realistically, but even just having a general sense of what kind of content I was going to cover each week and each month leading up to test day was really helpful and just helped break down this test for me. My second piece of advice too is not to get too discouraged because some subjects will be harder for you. but that doesn't mean that you can't improve. So for me, it was PAT. I took a PAT diagnostic test, and my predicted score was a 12 or a 13 out of 30. And for me, that was so discouraging initially. But with practice and a lot of practice and a lot of review, I really started to feel a lot more comfortable with those questions. So it is all a process. And I think don't let where you're starting out at the beginning define you, because you will get better.
Yeah, another advice on PET is like find a friend who just naturally is able to see those shapes and those keyholes like very well. And I asked one of my friend who did PT really well, and like I asked him like, can you just show me what you like, can you just tell me what you're
Mhm.
seeing, so that I could possibly use it for my own benefit later on. And PT does come in handy in dental school, so you're not just practicing for nothing. And I hope that that motivates you to practice PET a little bit more.
That is true. That's something that Min and I have talked about. It does seem a little bit random, the types of questions that you're asked on the PAT, but I can honestly say now as a second year student that the skills do come in handy because dentistry is really precise and it comes down to a matter of millimeters, and it requires you to have some good visual skills because you need to, for example, imagine how an X-ray translates to the 3D teeth and mouth that they capture. So it is helpful. So I think take time with the PAT and it will actually benefit you in the long run.
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
awesome. So next we're gonna switch gears a little bit and talk about the application process, which is a long process with a lot of different components. So we're gonna answer some questions about the application process and just talk about things that we wish we knew when we applied. So first question we have is, when should you apply to dental school? I'll let you start, Man.
Yeah, I would say, like, as people say, it's definitely beneficial if you apply as fast as you can. I think the applications open around June 15th for us. It opened around then for us, but maybe it changed after COVID. But one thing is, I know because people say apply as fast as you can, people try to submit it day one. And if your application is not really ready yet, I think it's a bad idea for you to just submit a mediocre application. It's best for you to really take time to take 10 days, or shouldn't make a difference. Even if I applied personally in July, mid-July, as soon as I finished taking the DAT. And I was in interview with people who submit their application in June. So it really doesn't matter if you submit within June and August timeframe. But one thing would be to make sure that your application is complete and ready to be shown to the admission committee.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Everyone says apply as early as possible, and that is true because dental school admissions are rolling admissions. So
Mhm.
they sort of read applications as they receive them. But yeah, exactly like Min said, if you're not ready yet, if you're waiting on some component of your application, or if you just need a little more time, take that time because it's worth submitting something that you're actually really proud of instead of just rushing it at the beginning. So I also applied to dental school early, I would say within a week or so of the application opening, but if that schedule doesn't seem realistic for you, then I would say take more time until you're ready.
Mhm.
So another component of the application is letters of recommendation.
Mhm.
So who did you ask for letters of recommendation from, and what was that process like for you?
Yeah, because I went to a small liberal arts college with a pre-health committee, I was able to ask for a committee letter rather than submitting individual letters of recommendation. So what that entails is all my recommenders would submit their recommendation to this one person, my pre-health advisor, who would then compile all those letters of recommendations and put it into one giant letter. So when I selected the people who would write my letters of recommendation, I select people who I have personal connections with, who I spent most time with. So my ethics professor, who I spent most of my time writing my ethics paper in dental field. I also like asked my boss, who I worked with for several years, and I really didn't ask a dentist to write my letter of recommendation personally because I felt like all the dentists that I shadowed or assisted didn't know me personally on my personality or my leadership skills or things that I really wanted to show off to the dental school. I felt like they couldn't really talk about that side of me on the letter of recommendation. So I selected about 6 professors and my uh, bosses, I guess, who wrote my letters of recommendation.
Yeah, that is a great point too. Not choosing someone who doesn't know you well. So choosing someone who has a personal connection with you ultimately ends up being better than choosing someone who has interacted with you very little. So Min had a committee letter written at her school. My undergrad didn't offer committee letters. So what I did was a little bit different, but I approached each of my professors or mentors who I wanted to write me a letter individually. Um, I sent them an email explaining that I was applying to dental school. I sent them my resume and I sent them a little personal statement blurb so they could get a sense of why I wanted to do dentistry. And then I asked them to write a letter for me. So I asked the dentist who I got most of my shadowing hours from, and then I asked a few science professors because most dental schools do want you to ask science professors for letters. And then I asked a Spanish professor who just knew me well in a personal capacity. So you definitely don't need all science professors. You can just choose people who know you and can speak to your character and your reasons for wanting to pursue a career in dentistry. And don't be discouraged too if you feel that you don't know your professors super well, because you can take the time to get to know them a little bit better. So I didn't know one of my professors very well, and she took the time to set up a Zoom call with me and just talk to me and get to know me for like 15 or 20 minutes before writing my letter. So that is also an option if you feel that there are people who don't know you well yet. You can still develop that relationship and then go ahead and ask them.
Mhm. And don't get too caught up on asking professors from the hardest course in your undergrad because the admissions committee might not even know that it's a hard course. And just because you went through a hard course may not really like that may not mean too much for the dental school. Rather like choose carefully of like mentors and professors who can speak to your personality and character and your previous achievements.
Yes.
And like what Lauren said, I think it's really important about like sending emails or like reaching out to your letter of recommenders because they may have forgotten some details about you and may need a little reminder of like what you did with them and like little stories that bring up your interactions with them.
Yes, that's also a great idea. Just mentioning interactions that you've had in the past, just to sort of jog their memory. So, okay. And then one more component of the application process that we want to talk about is personal statements. So we know for some people this is tough, especially if you're just staring at a blank page and you have no idea what to write. So, Min, can you explain what the process was like for you when you were writing your personal statement?
Yeah, I didn't really know where to start. So I would just like jot down reasons why in the beginning I chose the dental profession. I would just make a whole list and people who influence me, events that really like are important for me. And like I just like try to organize it in a nice way and like try to make sure that in within my personal statement it was all like it really showed who I am as a person and as a future dentist. And why I really would be devoted to this profession. I think that was where I was trying to take my personal statement. And afterwards, I thought it was really important for my writing to be looked at. Like English is my second language. And I wanted to make sure that my values and my thoughts were delivered clearly. And one way to do it is to send your personal statement drafts to your close friends who are really good writers or who are willing to look at your paper and edit and give comments back to you. And afterwards, I like just gathered all those comments and made edits and would ask them again to look at my final paper. And afterwards, it is when I felt like it was complete is when I submitted my personal statement.
Awesome. Yeah, my process was very similar to yours. So I always recommend starting by brainstorming and not really filtering yourself too much at this point. So you can just have the notes app on your phone, and anytime you think of something that you might want to write about, jot it down. So that's how I started. And then once I had a lot of things on that list, I looked back at the list and tried to figure out what themes I had and tried to make connections between the ideas that were on my list, tried to figure out what was most important to me and what was less important and I didn't feel needed to be in my statement. And then I started writing. So once I had my list sort of worked out, I started writing. And then just like Min did, I sent my statement to a couple of people to read it. So how many people you send your statement to varies. For me, I think I sent it to 2 people in total because I wanted outside opinions, but I didn't want too many conflicting opinions and I didn't want to lose my voice. So yeah, definitely recommend having at least 1 or 2 people look at it and make sure your story is coming across and making sure it sounds authentic and it sounds like something that you would write. My other piece of advice too is to try to avoid cliches. A lot of pre-dentals do have similar reasons for choosing dentistry. So a lot of us want a hands-on career and we want to make patients smile, and that's all great, but admissions officers are reading hundreds of personal statements. So if you can keep those cliches to a minimum and talk more about things that are really unique to you and what you bring to the table, I think that's what makes your statement stand out.
And I think you don't really have to create something special, like, and I think there's a balance between sounding too cliche and sounding like someone who you're not and being fake about yourself. I think you being you and like your experience itself should be very unique and special to you. Your value make you a special person. So just make sure that in your writing you mention that and you are just like able to show yourself off through the personal statement in your writing.
Yes, I love that. So last topic is sort of miscellaneous topics, things that we wish we knew or had thought of when we were pre-dentals. So the first thing we want to talk about is online forums, such as Student Doctor Network, where people are posting information about their applications, their interviews, etc. So, Min, what are your thoughts, I guess, now looking back on those sites and what role did they play for you?
It was nothing but anxiety for me. I think every time I go on Student Doctor Network, it just doesn't do anything except make myself like feel bad about my achievements and making me think that I'm never gonna be enough. People are gonna have better scores than me, better extracurriculars than me, but that word better is all just like from your internal voice saying that you need to do better in comparison to other people, and no one really knows what's the best, right? There is no one representation of perfect dental pre-dental student. So by going into forms like that, I think only stimulates anxiety, only stimulates imposter syndrome. Maybe you might feel like dentistry is not for you because you don't have this experience. um and trust me, like every people have different ways to get to dentistry. And you don't want to compare yourself from the start. People have different starting points, and admission committee knows that. And no one actually can say whether the admission committee will accept you or not accept you, because the admission people in the admission committee doesn't know for themselves too. Like, especially for our school, there are a bunch of people talking about a certain a certain applicant, and each person looks at that person differently, and they really talk it out. So just because people on the website are saying, oh, I think you need to work more, oh, I think you're gonna get in, doesn't really mean anything, because in the end it's not, it really doesn't matter, and it's all going to work out, and you have to believe that, and only when you believe that, you'll actually go for it, and it'll happen. You'll get that
Yeah, I love that.
acceptance letter.
And I agree 100%. I think yes, these websites can be a resource for some people and they are a source of information. But for me too, it really just created a lot of anxiety and comparison. And you also need to realize that the people who are posting on these sites are not reflective of the entire applicant pool. Right, people who are posting their scores or their stats maybe are more likely to have higher scores and want to share that with other people, but it is not an accurate representation of everyone who is applying. So I think if you can just steer clear of comparing yourself and just focusing on what you bring to the table, the process of applying to dental school will be a lot better for you.
So
Um,
don't go in. Unless you're actually looking for like a practical advice
yes,
on the application process.
yes. So that is our advice. Another thing I want to talk about is how involved in different activities you were or you should be in undergrad. I know some people like to take part in a lot of different activities and be very active. Some people like to commit to fewer activities but more in depth. So, what was it like for you in undergrad, and what advice do you have for people in terms of extracurriculars?
Mm. I was one of those pre-health student who like was always busy and didn't have time for social connections, and I kind of regret that a lot. The only reason why I did like a lot of extracurriculars and volunteering, shadowing was because I was anxious and thought that I had to do multiple activities in order for me to get into a dental school. Later, when I got into dental school, I realized that's not the case. And there is going to be one activity that you really, really like and represents who you are and like how you want to be a part of your community. And I think that really mattered the most in the end in my application, not those like little bits of extracurriculars that I thought I had to do in order to impress others. That really wasn't the main topic during interviews at all. It was the one thing that I really loved doing, and it like represented what I wanted to do in the future as a dentist.
That's true. I think in interviews too, it's pretty apparent to them what activities you really love and get excited about because those are the ones that you can really talk about for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I always suggest committing yourself to fewer things, but committing more deeply to those things. So maybe there's a couple organizations that you really like, and you're a member your first year and your second year of college, and then your third year, you're part of the executive board, and your fourth year, you're higher up in the leadership. So I think just having activities that you stick with and sort of grow in is more valuable than just sort of spreading yourself too thin in a bunch of activities that don't really mean too much to you or you don't get too involved in. So, and those activities too don't need to be related to dentistry or healthcare. So, for me in college, I did graphic design and I did tutoring, English language tutoring through one of our student groups on campus. And I really just spent a lot of time in those organizations. And even though that didn't directly relate to dentistry, it was something that I really loved to talk about and I really loved to do. And I was still able to connect it to dentistry. Like tutoring, for example, involves talking to people and learning how to communicate and connect with people. And that's also important in dentistry. So even the activities that you do that don't feel super connected, I'm sure for the most part can also be tied back to a skill that is relevant in dentistry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so just to wrap up and summarize, what advice would you give to your pre-dental self if you could go back a few years to when you were applying to dental school?
I knew you were gonna ask this question. So I thought about it, and I actually have two advice.
Okay, perfect.
One is not like you said, Lauren, like not focus too much on things that you might think you need to do as a pre-dental student. Like think everything does not really have to connect to dentistry. So while you're an undergrad and while you have the opportunity, really seize opportunities to look at the world and like do activities that really excites you, although it may not be related to healthcare. In the end, I think those are really valuable experiences that develop you as like a human being. Um, and for me personally, it was when I went abroad to Scotland, is when I had the most personal development. And like traveling abroad may not really necessarily connect back to healthcare, and things that I did in Scotland, which was play squash and dancing, does not relate to healthcare at all. But it really helped me become a social person and be the person I am today. The second advice is don't be too anxious and trust the process, because in the end, the reason why you're anxious is because you're trying to be the best version of you. Um, and that's perfectly fine. But don't try to ruin the present because you're worried about the future. If you do what you need to do and look what's in front of you, in the end process is going to lead you to a place where you'll be at the where you want to be at the end. For example, like maybe and think a lot about whether or not dentistry would be the right profession for you. Shadowing might not be enough, or like maybe reach out to people who are already in dental school or in dentistry, what it took for them to become um, what it will take to become a dentist. Dental school is like actually really hard, and there are a lot of subjects that are coming at me that I did not think would be a part of dental school when I was an undergrad, like pathology, looking at like skin lesions, all those terms, dental anatomy, all those things are things that I did not know when I got myself into dental school. So really evaluate yourself, think about who you are as a person, whether or not you really want dentistry as your profession, and it would just lead you to where you should be in the future.
Thank you, Min. I love that advice. Completely agree with you on making sure that this is what you want to do because it is a big commitment, money-wise and time-wise and life-wise. So I agree that talking to people is really helpful, shadowing is helpful, talking to current students and dentists who are practicing is very helpful. And then I also loved what you said about not ruining the present by worrying so much about the future. So my advice is somewhat similar. If I could go back and talk to my pre-dental self, I would want myself to worry less about where I was going to end up and how things were going to end up. And of course, that's very natural. It's very natural to be anxious about this process because it's important to you. And it's natural to be wondering and kind of rushing and hoping that the next step will come. But I wish I could go back and just be more present in the moment, enjoy my time in college more, and not be so anxious and rushing to get to the next step. Dental school is great in its own way, and I'm really happy with where I'm at right now. But I wish I had just been a little more present in the past and enjoyed undergrad because undergrad too is a lot more carefree, and I do miss those aspects of it sometimes. So that would be my advice. Thank you, Min, so much for being here and for sharing all of your wisdom and your advice. Really, really appreciate it. And so happy that you were able to join us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you so much for listening. I hope you found advice that was helpful for you during this discussion. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can contact me at hi@crackdat.com. So that's hi@crackdat.com. Be sure to check out crackdat.com to check out all the resources that are available if you are a pre-dental student and are getting ready to study for the DAT. So thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you in the next episode of Pre-Dental Talk.